case of Sarah Ann Wood. Sarah Ann Wood was born on March 4, 1981 in New York. Raised in a devout family, her father served as a pastor in a small town in the state's middle. From a young age, Sarah, along with her older sister and brother, attended services at her father's church and Sunday school. Dancing was her passion, poetry brought her joy, and she was an enthusiastic member of her school's cheerleading team. Sarah loved nothing more than riding her bike, often using it to get to her father's church, less than a mile from home, for services, Sunday school, or to lend her father a hand. On August 18, 1993, when Sarah was 12, she rode her bike to church for Sunday school, following her usual routine. With her father staying home, the classes were conducted by other church members. Her parents expected her to return immediately after the classes, but as time passed and she failed to appear, they grew increasingly anxious. After waiting a little longer, they headed to the church, thinking Sarah might have lingered behind with friends, but she was nowhere to be found. The Sunday school teachers reported that she had departed on her bike soon after classes, taking with her a few books, some colorful folders, and a small display board. Her parents' concern escalated because the ride home from church should have taken only a few minutes, and it was unlikely Sarah would have gone elsewhere with all those items. Moreover, she always sought permission before deviating from her routine. Her parents retraced the route to the church, inquiring with neighbors if anyone had seen their daughter, leveraging the small town's familiarity and Sarah's father's church connections. Dozens of people quickly joined the search, and they soon found a witness who had seen Sarah riding towards her house around 2:30 p.m., just a few hundred yards from her home. This sighting only intensified her parents' anxiety, convinced that something had indeed happened to Sarah, prompting them to contact the police. The local police department swiftly launched a search operation, deploying dozens of officers to scour the area. The sheriff also requested assistance from the fire department, and they joined forces to aid in the search. News of Sarah's disappearance spread rapidly throughout the community, prompting dozens of volunteers to join the effort. Within the first few hours, several hundred people were involved in the search. The police concentrated on the route from the church to Sarah's home, meticulously searching the fields and woods on both sides of the road. Their efforts soon yielded a disturbing discovery. Just a few yards into the woods, they found Sarah's bike leaning against a tree. The police centered their focus on that area and quickly uncovered the items Sarah had brought from Sunday school, hidden beneath a nearby bush. These findings led investigators to a grim inference. It was likely that Sarah had been abducted. They theorized that an unknown assailant might have dragged her from the road into the woods, left her belongings behind, and then taken her away in a vehicle. The police department launched an all-out search effort, pouring all its resources into finding Sarah. Meanwhile, her restless relatives took matters into their own hands, printing flyers with details of her disappearance and distributing them not only in their hometown, but also in surrounding cities, with the help of dozens of volunteers. Despite their collective efforts, the first day's search yielded nothing. Police and volunteers scoured the area within a several-mile radius of the road until nightfall, but no new leads emerged. The search resumed the next morning, with even more people joining the effort. The state police also joined the investigation, focusing on identifying a potential suspect. Investigators questioned every resident in town, hoping someone might have spotted a suspicious stranger or vehicle linked to Sarah's disappearance. Sarah's parents set up an improvised headquarters, manned by dozens of volunteers, who printed and distributed flyers, scouring for witnesses or leads that could bring them closer to finding Sarah. As local media picked up the story, news of her disappearance spread nationwide within days. The police received over 1,000 tips, meticulously investigating each one, but repeatedly hit dead ends. Concerned residents helped the parents raise a substantial $150,000 reward for any information about Sarah's whereabouts. But unfortunately, This, too, yielded nothing. The active phase of the search continued for about a week before the police concluded they were unlikely to find valuable leads in the area. They shifted their focus to finding a potential suspect, scrutinizing local residents and convicted criminals from neighboring towns, but to no avail. Sarah's disappearance was featured on 2 popular national television shows, triggering a new wave of tips. Her parents made regular appeals to the public through the media, pleading for any information about their daughter's whereabouts, but her fate remained a mystery. This continued for nearly 6 months until a surprising breakthrough occurred. On the morning of January 7, 1994, 12-year-old Rebecca left her home in a small Massachusetts town and set out on her walk to school. As she strolled down a deserted street, she noticed a man walking alongside her. He attempted to speak, but Rebecca couldn't hear him due to her headphones. When she removed them, the man brandished a gun and warned her that if she obeyed his every command, he wouldn't harm her. He grasped her jacket, and they continued walking in the same direction. Rebecca was terrified to scream or attempt to flee, aware that even if she complied, the man might still kill her. As they walked, she quickly devised a plan. Feigning an asthma attack, she struggled to breathe and sat down on the ground. The man released her jacket, instead gripping the edge of her backpack as she continued to act as if she were suffocating. Seizing the moment, Rebecca slipped out of the backpack straps and sprinted away from her kidnapper. A few hundred yards away, she spotted several adults and rushed towards them, exclaiming that someone had just attempted to abduct her. Meanwhile, the kidnapper sped away in his car, taking Rebecca's backpack with him. One of the witnesses took it upon himself to tail the kidnapper in his own vehicle. After a few minutes, the witness pulled over at the nearest gas station and alerted the police. The witness was able to provide a partial license plate number and the car's model, while Rebecca gave a detailed description of the kidnapper's appearance. The police promptly launched a search for the vehicle, scouring databases for matching cars. They also sent out alerts to neighboring towns, and their efforts were rewarded that very evening. A patrol officer driving through a nearby small town spotted a vehicle matching the description. He pulled over and knocked on the door of the house where it was parked. Inside, he found several people, and upon inquiring about the pickup truck, the owner explained that he hadn't driven it in a while due to his loss of sight. He revealed that his neighbor, 43-year-old Louis Lint, frequently borrowed the truck. Louis, a handyman, assisted his blind neighbor with various household tasks in exchange for using the pickup truck. According to Louis, he last drove the truck the previous day and hadn't used it since. Nonetheless, the officer asked him to come to the station for questioning, and Louis complied. Despite his earlier denial, Louis continued to insist that he hadn't used the pickup that day and had no involvement in the attempted abduction. He claimed to be a devout Christian who spent most of his free time at church and would never engage in such an act. While Louis was at the station, the police took his photograph and presented it to Rebecca and other witnesses in a photo lineup alongside pictures of other men. Unanimously, they identified Louis as the kidnapper. Investigators promptly obtained a warrant to search Louis's house and the vehicles, including the pickup truck owned by his neighbor. Their search yielded a disturbing discovery: a small bag containing duct tape, a knife, children's sunglasses, and candy in Louis's van, which was parked near their house. Additionally, the police found a gun and Rebecca's backpack inside the house. Investigators uncovered a shocking discovery: a large, secret room dug out beneath the house, still under construction. With this substantial evidence, the police arrested Louis for the attempted abduction. Initially, he maintained his innocence, but soon decided to confess to everything. He admitted to traveling to Rebecca's town in search of a victim, bringing along his kidnapping bag that he always kept in his car. Louis then explained the purpose of the secret room he was digging under his house, and his story left even the police stunned. He revealed that he planned to convert it into a fully equipped bunker where he intended to hold kidnapped victims captive. Lewis confessed to aiming to abduct 11 girls between the ages of 12 and 17 to satisfy his horrific fantasies. He added that until the room was completed, he didn't plan to keep his victims there for long, intending to kill them within a few days. In Lewis's house, the police also found a list of several names. Upon identifying these individuals, they realized they were all children living in close proximity to Lewis's home. Following his confession, Lewis was placed in jail awaiting trial for attempted abduction. Investigators continued to visit him to gather additional information, and during one of these visits, he unexpectedly confessed to another crime. Lewis revealed that 4 years prior, in October 1990, he was working as a janitor at a movie theater in the same town where he later attempted to kidnap Rebecca. On the evening of October 22nd, he left work and spotted 12-year-old James Bernardo riding his bike near the parking lot. Lewis instantly decided to abduct him, intending to assault him. Lewis offered James $5 to help set up chairs in the movie theater, and the boy agreed. Lewis led him to the empty theater, where he bound him. He then drove his van closer to the entrance, dragged the boy and his bike inside, and took him to his home. He left the boy there and drove to a nearby lake to dispose of the bike by throwing it into the water. Lewis returned home and attempted to assault the boy, but was unsuccessful. Frustrated, he decided to dispose of the victim. He dragged him into his van and drove to a neighboring state, where he murdered the boy and left the body in the forest. A hunter soon discovered the body and reported it to the police. However, despite their efforts, detectives were unable to identify the culprit over the course of several years. Now, upon comparing Lewis's statement with the case materials, investigators discovered that he had provided an astonishing number of facts and details about the crime that perfectly mirrored reality. Following Lewis's confession, news of his case spread like wildfire throughout the country. Within just a few days, police realized they were dealing with a man who not only had attempted to abduct a girl and was building a secret bunker for other victims, but had also confessed to a murder that no one had suspected him of. New York investigators searching for Sarah Wood soon caught wind of Lewis's case. They delved into the details of Rebecca's attempted abduction and requested more information about Lewis himself. Interestingly, profilers had previously created a profile of Sarah's potential abductor, and Lewis seemed to fit it remarkably well. The investigators decided to pay him a visit and headed to the prison. During the interrogation, he revealed that frequent visits to the neighboring state were motivated by close family ties. Lewis also admitted that he would often drive through small towns in search of victims, and on August 18, 1993, he spotted Sarah walking along the road with her bike. According to his statement, he pulled up beside her, got out of the car, and forced her into the van at gunpoint. He then tied her up, dragged her belongings and bike into the nearby woods to conceal them, and drove her hundreds of miles to the mountains. In a remote area by a large lake, he assaulted and killed her, eventually burying her body in a hole. The police launched an extensive search effort around the lake, mobilizing hundreds of volunteers, park rangers, and the military. However, the vast size of the lake posed a significant challenge, making it nearly impossible to cover the entire area, even with such a large search team. Furthermore, with months having passed since the burial, the location could have become overgrown with vegetation. After weeks of searching, they were unable to find either the body or any evidence. Detailed testimony with precise details of the abduction was sufficient to charge Lewis with the murders of both Sarah and 12-year-old James. In January 1995, Lewis was sentenced to 17 to 20 years in prison for the attempted abduction of Rebecca. The following June, the trial for James's murder began, and Lewis pleaded guilty before the judge. He confided in his lawyer that he wanted to confess to Sarah's murder immediately, but when he entered the courtroom and saw her parents, he abruptly changed his mind. However, Just 9 days later, when he was brought into an empty courtroom, he finally admitted his guilt. Despite this, he persisted in refusing to disclose the burial site, ignoring the desperate pleas from Sarah's parents. The prosecution offered Lewis a deal in exchange for information about Sarah's whereabouts. In return, they promised to serve his sentence in a state prison instead of a federal prison, as Lewis had requested. He agreed and began collaborating with investigators. Lewis identified a specific area near the lake and even sketched a rough map. Although the police wanted to take him along on the search, his lawyer cautioned against it. Undeterred, the police organized extensive searches in this area, braving the snow and freezing temperatures, with the help of hundreds of volunteers and heavy equipment. Despite their efforts, they were still unable to find Sarah. Several months later, with autumn's arrival, the police launched another attempt, but it ultimately proved unsuccessful. Throughout this period, detectives endeavored to extract more specific information from Lewis, but he persistently refused to divulge the exact location or assist the police in their search. Eventually, the prosecution opted to revoke the deal, and on April 11, 1997, Lewis was sentenced to 25 years in prison, the maximum sentence the judge could impose without the discovery of the body. The judge added that if such evidence were available, he would have certainly handed down a death sentence. During the trial, Lewis's lawyer attempted to mitigate the punishment in all three cases without disputing his client's guilt. He argued that Lewis suffered from an unidentified mental disorder, citing claims of hearing voices in his head and alleged protection by aliens. However, experts found no evidence of any mental disease and concluded that Lewis was likely feigning these symptoms to avoid severe punishment. After the verdict, detectives persisted in visiting Lewis in prison, hoping to coax him into revealing Sarah's burial site. His behavior was erratic, and he provided contradictory information, naming different locations. On one occasion, he claimed he wasn't ready to disclose the location because he had buried Sarah alongside another victim, and he didn't want anyone to uncover the identity of this other person. Despite the emotional pleas of Sarah's parents, who also visited Lewis in prison, he remained resolute in his silence. The detectives were also exploring Lewis's potential involvement in other unsolved cases. Having confessed to the abductions of Sarah and James, the police had little doubt that he had additional victims. Almost immediately after his arrest, they uncovered another attempted abduction he had made several years prior. Lewis had tried to grab a girl off the street, but her father intervened, and they reported the incident to the police, although detectives couldn't identify the perpetrator until Lewis's photo appeared in the news. Lewis was also suspected of being involved in 4 unsolved disappearances between 1985 and 1992, and investigators concluded that he had the capability to commit these crimes, but no evidence was found, and Lewis refused to confess. Despite this, his story didn't end there. Detectives continued to visit him after his sentencing, hoping he would reveal Sarah's whereabouts or confess to other crimes. However, it wasn't until 2013 that Lewis suddenly had a change of heart and confessed to another murder. He admitted to being responsible for one of the crimes he was suspected of. According to Lewis, on November 6, 1992, he abducted a 16-year-old teenager with developmental disabilities who was riding a bike to his grandmother's house. He claimed to have forced the boy into his van, then killed him and dumped his body in a lake. Investigators confirmed his involvement based on his detailed description of the events, although official charges in the case have yet to be filed against him to this day. Currently, Lewis is 73 years old and remains incarcerated for 2 murders and an attempted abduction. Sarah's parents hold on to the hope that they will eventually persuade him to reveal the location of her burial site, or that he will divulge this secret before his death. In memory of Sarah, her relatives also organize an annual bike ride. Initially attended by just a few people, the event has grown steadily, with several thousand participants now regularly taking part. This event also helps raise significant funds to support efforts to locate missing children. The police are determined to find Sarah's burial site and are not giving up, even if Lewis is not willing to help them. They will keep searching the areas he has pointed out until they locate her body. The case of Jonathan Hoffman. Jonathan Hoffman was born in Michigan in 1994 to Jennifer and Michael Hoffman. His sister Jessica was born 3 years later, and from a very young age, the two siblings formed an unbreakable bond and shared a special connection that would last a lifetime. However, Jonathan's parents, Jennifer and Michael, faced significant struggles in their marriage, and their frequent fights often forced them to leave Jonathan and Jessica in the care of their grandmother, Sandra. Sandra, Jennifer's mother, played a crucial role in the lives of her grandchildren, providing a safe, loving, and nurturing environment for them. The children cherished the time they spent with their grandmother, who offered them a sense of stability in an otherwise tumultuous upbringing. In 2008, after years of turmoil, Jennifer and Michael divorced when Jonathan was a senior at Farmington Central High School. Following the divorce, Jennifer made the difficult decision to relocate the family from Michigan to Arizona. This move was particularly hard for Jonathan, who was forced to leave behind the only life he had ever known, including his friends, familiar surroundings, and the comfort of his childhood home. The situation rapidly deteriorated for Jonathan and his family after they moved to Arizona. Not long after their relocation, his younger sister Jessica fell critically ill. Medical tests revealed a tumor in her brain, prompting urgent surgery to remove it the very next day. Although the operation was a success, it entailed a lengthy convalescence, and Jessica spent an entire month recovering in the hospital. Throughout this period, Jennifer dedicated herself fully to her daughter's recovery, neglecting her own needs in the process. This left Jonathan feeling abandoned and lonely, forced to navigate the challenges of adolescence in a new state without the emotional support of his mother and sister. Recognizing the strain Jonathan was under, his grandmother Sandra reached out to Jennifer, deeply concerned about her grandson's well-being. Believing familiar surroundings and old friends would bring Jonathan solace, Sandra suggested he return to Michigan to live with her and her husband Fred. Jennifer worried whether her 74-year-old mother would be capable of caring for him, but Sandra reassured her that she was more than capable. 1 month after the Hoffman family's move to Arizona, Jonathan returned to Michigan and moved in with Sandra and Fred. The homecoming brought Jonathan immense joy and relief midway through his senior year of high school. Thrilled to be back among friends and family, he felt a sense of comfort and belonging he had missed in Arizona. His friends recall that Jonathan was initially shy, but once he opened up, he was a lot of fun and loved to make people laugh. With a zest for adventure, he was always up for trying new things. Although Jennifer deeply missed her son, she embarked on the journey to Michigan to spend 2 weeks with him. During her visit, she was dismayed to discover that Jonathan had been smoking marijuana. However, Jennifer viewed this as a typical phase of teenage experimentation and was confident it didn't involve harder substances. With a heavy heart, Jennifer bid farewell to Jonathan, confident that he would be in good hands with his grandmother. But little did she know, Jonathan was in grave peril, and it was at the hands of his grandmother, Sandra. On May 19, 2017, at 5:27 p.m., Jonathan Hoffman made a frantic 911 call, his voice trembling as he relayed to the dispatcher that his grandmother had shot him and he was dying. The dispatcher sprang into action, swiftly dispatching police and paramedics to Jonathan's residence. As she spoke to him, she tried to reassure him that help was on the way, her voice steady amidst the chaos and fear in his. Suddenly, an ominous silence fell on the line, and for a moment, the dispatcher feared the connection had been dropped, or worse, that Jonathan had succumbed to his injuries. But then, just as her heart sank, she heard a barrage of gunfire erupt from the phone, followed by a pained cry. Jonathan yelled, "Ow!" as his voice cracked with terror, telling the operator that his grandmother had shot him again. The West Bloomfield Township Police Department officers responded swiftly to the scene, arriving at Sandra Lane's house at 5:33 p.m. As they approached, the sound of gunfire echoed from within the residence. Trained to handle such situations, the officers didn't hesitate, taking necessary precautions to ensure their safety. They positioned themselves behind their patrol vehicles, using them as cover from their vantage point. Observing a woman moving inside the house, they issued clear, direct commands, ordering the individual to put their weapon on the ground. After a tense moment, the officers heard the sound of a gun being secured, and with the assurance that the person inside had put the firearm away, they entered the residence. When the police made it inside the home, they found 74-year-old Sandra Lane standing before them, a Glock 17 .40 caliber handgun at her feet. Sandra repeated several times in an eerily calm tone that she had murdered her grandson, stating the disturbing sentiment as fact. One of the police officers asked Sandra why she had killed her grandson, but she remained silent, offering no explanation. 2 minutes after the police arrived, Sandra was handcuffed and placed in the back of a patrol vehicle. Officers entered her home to find the victim, whom Sandra claimed was her grandson, 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman. Inside the home, the air was thick with smoke, making it difficult to see through the haze as they ascended the staircase. They reached the landing where Jonathan lay motionless, face down on the hardwood floor, dressed in gym shorts and socks. The young man's body was riddled with gunshot wounds to his upper torso. Despite the severity of his condition, the medics managed to detect a faint pulse. With urgency, Jonathan was rushed to Botsford Hospital, where a team of medical professionals worked tirelessly to stabilize his condition. However, their efforts ultimately proved futile, and after 30 minutes of intense medical intervention, he was pronounced dead. After the ambulance rushed Jonathan Hoffman to the hospital, police secured Sandra Lane's home as a crime scene. The 3-level residence was a labyrinth of violence and blood, with nearly every room telling a grim tale. Crime scene investigators arrived, meticulously combing the area for clues to unravel the shocking events. As they descended the basement staircase, they were struck by footprints in the blood-stained floor, crucial evidence carefully preserved. Deeper in the house, the team found 10 bullet casings scattered throughout, each one collected and analyzed. One investigator discovered a bullet hole in the drywall, and the search for more evidence led them to the 2nd floor, where a gun case filled with ammunition was found. While gathering evidence, investigators took extra care to photograph Sandra, capturing her face, arms, and hands as she sat in the patrol car. Sandra became overwhelmed, tears streaming down her face. Amidst the chaos, Fred Lane, Sandra's husband, appeared outside the house with their dog, claiming to have been gone for an hour, a walk he took after Sandra asked him to. Fred was stunned to discover that his wife, Sandra Lane, had confessed to shooting and killing their grandson Jonathan after he was pronounced dead at the hospital. The police faced the daunting task of breaking the news to Jonathan's family that their beloved son had been murdered by his own grandmother. As detectives dug deeper into the case, they learned that Jonathan had been living in Michigan, separated from his parents and sister who resided in Arizona. When the detectives shared the devastating news with Jennifer, informing her that her mother had taken the life of her cherished son, she was left in a state of utter disbelief. It seemed unbelievable that someone who was supposed to love and care for their grandchildren could commit such an atrocity. The fact that Jonathan was his grandmother's favorite made the tragedy even more incomprehensible, leaving everyone wondering how he met his end at Sandra's hands. As the day drew to a close, around 7:30 p.m., the police decided to take Sandra Lane to the hospital for a health evaluation, given her advanced age. While waiting in the emergency room, Sandra maintained that Jonathan had never harmed her, describing him as a kind boy who never hurt anyone. After a medical assessment, the doctors cleared Sandra of any suspicious injuries. With this, the police decided to return her to the patrol car and take her to the police department for further questioning. On May 20th, after midnight, Sandra's attorney met her at the police station before she provided her official statement to the police. Seated alongside her attorney, Sandra sought legal counsel when the detectives eventually met with them. Sandra's story took a dramatic turn at the police station. Contradicting her initial statement at the hospital, where she had claimed her grandson was not involved, she now alleged that she and Jonathan had engaged in a heated altercation involving yelling and screaming. During this confrontation, Jonathan had kicked her in the stomach, leaving her fearing for her life. According to Sandra, Jonathan's behavior had become increasingly erratic and angry of late. He would come and go from her house at all hours, frequently bringing over people she didn't care for. Furthermore, Sandra had noticed that valuables had gone missing from her home, leading her to suspect that Jonathan or his friends might be involved in theft. Sandra also mentioned that her grandson had a history of run-ins with the law. Sandra stated that Jonathan was pulled over by an officer while driving, and cannabis was found in his car. However, this didn't deter him, and he was stopped again by an officer shortly after. This time, he was found to be in possession of Adderall. Sandra also recalled an incident where she had to call 911 due to Jonathan's aggressive behavior. During that episode, he was yelling obscene remarks at her. Despite this, when the police arrived, Sandra persuaded them not to arrest him. According to Sandra, she was compelled to buy a gun due to Jonathan's behavior. Sandra alleged that everything escalated on May 18th when she accompanied Jonathan to the probation department due to his non-compliance with his probation terms. After returning home, Sandra stated that Jonathan threatened to take her car, which led to him attacking her. Since there were no witnesses to Jonathan's shooting apart from Sandra, the detectives faced a significant challenge in verifying her account. Sandra claimed self-defense, prompting the detectives to conduct a thorough investigation into the incident. Their primary concern was ensuring they didn't wrongfully send a 74-year-old frail grandmother to prison for defending herself against a violent teenage boy. The detectives examined the photo taken by crime scene investigators immediately after Sandra confessed to shooting Jonathan. However, upon reviewing the evidence, they found no signs of violence on Sandra, not a single scratch, which would be expected if she had indeed been in a physical struggle. During her court arraignment, the judge ruled that Sandra should be held on bond while awaiting trial at the correctional facility. Paul Walton, the prosecutor on the case, believed the 911 call made by Jonathan clashed with Sandra's self-defense claim. Upon listening to the call, Walton noticed a significant 2-minute and 51-second silence before Sandra fired another shot at Jonathan. Based on his observations, it seemed clear that Jonathan was already severely injured and no longer posed an immediate threat to Sandra. However, Sandra's defense team presented a contrasting argument. They countered that Jonathan still posed a threat despite his injuries. The defense highlighted a portion of the 911 call where Sandra yells, "Let go," implying that Jonathan was still attacking his grandmother, even in his injured state. The defense argued that Sandra was simply an innocent and loving grandmother. They pointed to the end of the 911 call, where Sandra can be heard instructing her bleeding grandson to lie down and promising to get him water, as proof of her compassionate nature. According to the defense, these statements revealed Sandra's true character as a caring and empathetic woman. Prosecutor Walton was perplexed by Sandra Lane. Was she a doting grandmother forced to make the ultimate sacrifice in a desperate situation, or a ruthless killer who stalked her own grandson, callously ending his life in the woods? To uncover the truth, Prosecutor Walton conducted a series of interviews around town. The testimonies uniformly portrayed Sandra as an ordinary, kind-hearted grandmother. She regularly visited the local salon, actively participated in her synagogue, taught Sunday school, and volunteered her time. Her generosity and affluence were also well known, What struck the detectives most was the resoundingly positive feedback from those who knew Sandra. They described her as deeply devoted to her grandchildren, particularly Jonathan. The testimony seemed to starkly contradict the heinous act she had confessed to committing. However, a different narrative unfolded when the detectives spoke with Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, and Jonathan's mother. Jennifer offered a contrasting perspective on her mother's character, contradicting the image projected by the community. She described her mother as a controlling and abusive figure, vastly different from the warm and compassionate person others had portrayed. According to Jennifer, her childhood was marked by constant parental fighting, with her mother physically assaulting her on multiple occasions. Her father's frequent absences left Sandra in complete control of the household, allowing her to behave like a tyrant, prone to violent outbursts. Years later, when Sandra remarried Fred Lane, Jennifer witnessed a significant shift in her mother's behavior. Sandra expressed deep affection for Fred, believing him to be a stabilizing influence in their home. Initially, her controlling nature seemed to subside. However, after Jennifer gave birth to Jonathan, Sandra allegedly attempted to reassert her dominance. Jennifer claimed that her mother's obsession with the baby bordered on an unhealthy level, with Sandra becoming so fixated that Jennifer jokingly wondered if she wanted to kidnap the child. After Sandra was charged with murdering her grandson Jonathan, the community of West Bloomfield surprisingly rallied around her. A significant number of residents believed Jonathan was a drug user who got what was coming to him, sparking a wave of support for Sandra. On social media, community members posted messages of encouragement, affectionately referring to her as Granny and using the hashtag #GoGrannyGo. In this narrative, Jonathan was vilified as a monster, while Sandra was portrayed as an innocent, frail, elderly woman. Jennifer revealed that most of her family had bought into Sandra's self-defense story, effectively disowning both Jonathan's memory and herself. Throughout the ordeal, Sandra's husband Fred stood by her side, offering unconditional support. The medical examiner concluded that Jonathan Hoffman's death was a homicide, resulting from the multiple gunshot wounds he suffered. An examination of the wounds revealed stippling, indicating that the gun was fired from varying distances. Additionally, a toxicology report revealed the presence of synthetic marijuana, also known as spice, or specifically K2, in Jonathan's system. At the time, spice was widely available in West Bloomfield, particularly among teens and young adults, who could purchase it at gas stations without identification. There were numerous reports of individuals experiencing adverse reactions to the substance, including violent behavior after consumption. 1 month prior to Jonathan's death, a disturbingly similar incident occurred involving another student from the same high school. Michael Cipriano, a classmate of Jonathan's, murdered his father, Robert, after a heated verbal argument. According to reports, Michael was under the influence of the synthetic drug spice at the time of the attack. Jonathan's sister, Jessica, harbored a deep affection for her brother, but she was also aware of his emotional instability and occasional violent outbursts. Despite her reluctance to consider it, she couldn't shake the suspicion that her brother might have harmed their grandmother, leading her to ultimately shoot and kill him. 2 months after her arrest, Sandra was arraigned in circuit court and indicted on 2 additional charges: possession of a firearm and committing a felony. Furthermore, she faced a distinctive charge known as open murder, which is only applicable in select states such as Nevada and Michigan. This unique charge encompasses both first and second-degree murder. Prosecutor Paul Walton was concerned that the jury might hesitate to convict a grandmother of premeditated murder, so he opted to present the jury with a broader range of options. This decision displeased the defense, who felt that the prosecution was shirking their responsibility. In 2013, Sandra Lane faced trial for the murder of her grandson, sparking widespread national outrage. Many directed blame at the boy's mother, Jennifer, for sending him to Michigan to stay with Sandra. Throughout the trial, the defense portrayed Sandra as a devoted and loving grandmother, but the prosecution disputed her claim of self-defense. They presented telling images of Sandra taken after the shooting, highlighting inconsistencies. Her clothes remained unripped, her jewelry was still intact, and her hair was styled as usual. Moreover, bloody footprints found in the basement, matching Sandra's shoes, implied that she had searched for additional ammunition. After the prosecution rested its case, Sandra's defense team presented their argument to bolster their stance. Sandra's attorney took a calculated risk by allowing her to testify on her own behalf. The attorney believed it was crucial for the jury to hear directly from Sandra herself, giving a first-hand account of the experiences she had while living with her grandson Jonathan in the months leading up to his tragic death. According to Sandra, Jonathan had a history of violent outbursts, often kicking in doors and breaking objects. On one occasion, he even shattered a computer monitor. On the day of the incident that ultimately led to Jonathan's death, Sandra alleged that he struck her in the head, leaving her feeling threatened and terrified. As a result, she decided to retrieve her gun, hoping it would serve as a deterrent to protect herself. Her intention, as stated in her testimony, was not to take her grandson's life, but rather to stop him from getting back up and attacking her again. However, during cross-examination by prosecutor Paul Walton, Sandra's account began to unravel. Under Walton's pressure, Sandra conceded that her motivation for obtaining the gun was not fear for her safety, but rather a desire to get Jonathan to listen to her. This admission severely undermined her credibility as a witness and made it increasingly difficult to argue self-defense. Experts testified that the K2 spice found in Jonathan's urine at the time of his death suggested he was not under the influence of the drug when he died. The presence of the drug in his urine indicated that it had already been metabolized, casting doubt on Sandra's claim that Jonathan was high on the drug and violent. After hearing the evidence presented at the trial, the jury deliberated for 2 days before returning a guilty verdict for second-degree murder and the use of a firearm during the commission of a felony. Sandra was subsequently sentenced to 20 years in prison. The case of Michaela Gerecht. On November 19, 1988, Michaela, then 9 years old, and her friend Katrina were busy trying on different outfits for an upcoming school performance at their homes. The joy was palpable as it marked the beginning of the Thanksgiving break. Around 10 a.m., Katrina's dad gave her $5 to buy some candy. The two friends rushed to Michaela's house to ask her mom if they could visit the nearby store, which was less than a mile away. Although they had been to the store many times before, with family or older neighbors, Michaela's mom was hesitant to let them go alone, citing their young age and lack of experience. After some cajoling, Michaela's mom finally agreed, on the condition that they would purchase the candy and head straight back home. As Michaela was her parents' long-awaited first child, a true miracle, her mom was particularly concerned about her safety. Despite her reservations, Michaela's mom believed that nothing bad would happen, given the store's proximity and their plan to ride their scooters there. Michaela raced back to Katrina's house. They planned to use 2 scooters, so Katrina took hers and borrowed another one from her brother. They went to the store, parked their scooters nearby, and went inside to make their purchases. When they came out, they got engrossed in conversation and completely forgot about their scooters. They started walking home, but quickly realized their mistake and returned to where they had left the scooters. That's when they noticed Michaela's scooter was missing. Assuming someone had moved it, they decided to search the store area from different angles. Michaela scanned the parking lot and soon spotted her scooter next to a car parked a short distance from the store. As she approached it, Katrina suddenly heard a terrifying scream. She ran back and saw a man grabbing Michaela and forcing her into the car beside her scooter. The man promptly got back in the driver's seat and sped off. Shaken, Katrina rushed into the store and alerted the cashier about the incident. The cashier immediately called the police, who arrived at the scene within minutes. The store employee also contacted Michaela's father, as they were acquainted, and informed him of the situation. Michaela's father, accompanied by Katrina's father, hurried to the store where investigators had already gathered. He instructed his wife to remain at home by the phone, awaiting a possible call from the police. The detectives faced a multitude of challenges from the outset. The lack of surveillance cameras near the store and the sole witness, Katrina, who was in a state of deep shock and barely able to speak, hindered their progress. Her father was permitted to take her home, leaving the store cashier as the initial lead. She recounted a suspicious individual loitering around the store shortly before the abduction. He had parked his car, exited, but never entered the store, instead opting to walk along the building, peering through windows and seemingly watching them. The cashier had a gut feeling that he might be planning to rob her. Based on her description, the man was white, approximately 30 years old, and sported a prominent mustache. He arrived in an old maroon-colored sedan, but the model and license plate number remained unclear. After gathering the suspect's description, the police created a composite sketch and disseminated it to the media. News of the abduction spread rapidly throughout the city and beyond, leaving the public shocked that such a brazen act could occur in a busy area. The police also shared the sketch and a description of the suspect's car with hundreds of patrol officers across the county. Officers began stopping vehicles matching the description, hoping to find her alive. Meanwhile, the detectives turned over Maya's scooter to forensic experts for analysis. They suspected that the kidnapper had witnessed Maya and Katrina's arrival at the store and strategically positioned one of the scooters near the back door of his car to facilitate the abduction. This led them to believe that his fingerprints might be on the scooter, and indeed they discovered a fingerprint that didn't match anyone in Katrina's family or the 9-year-old girl. However, there was a hitch. The fingerprint was incomplete, making it challenging to conduct a database search at the time, as the technology wasn't sophisticated enough for such procedures. As a result, the police had to rely on direct comparisons with potential suspects. By the evening of the abduction, the FBI had joined the investigation, prompted by a surge in child disappearances, not only in Hayward but also in surrounding cities. They suspected a link between Michaela's case and these other vanishings. Despite the FBI's involvement and widespread media attention, little progress was made in locating the missing girl. Michaela's parents were understandably heartbroken, and her mother was consumed by guilt, replaying the events leading up to the abduction. In particular, she recalled an unsettling incident just a week prior, where Michaela had risen unusually early, sat at the kitchen table, and claimed to be writing a poem. This was peculiar, given her daughter's usual sleep patterns, and the poem's theme, people being abducted and hidden in attics but not killed, seemed eerily prescient. At the time, her mother had found it strange for a 9-year-old to conceive such ideas, but in hindsight, it took on an uncanny, almost prophetic quality, leaving her to wonder if Michaela had unwittingly foreseen her own fate. In the 2 days following the abduction, the police launched an exhaustive search for the suspect and the missing girl, but despite their best efforts, they failed to make any progress. In a bid to gather more information, they decided to re-interview Katrina, hoping that time might have jogged her memory. However, this decision led to a perplexing twist. The girl who witnessed the abduction and the cashier provided contradictory descriptions of the kidnapper's appearance. Katrina described the man as around 20 years old, with long, unkempt, light-colored hair that reached his shoulders and a face covered in pimples. She also remembered his piercing blue eyes, reminiscent of a fox's. Furthermore, she recalled some details about the car, a beige sedan with a boxy shape and numerous dents. In contrast, the cashier's suspicion had been sparked by a man near the store whose description was vastly different from Katrina's. This discrepancy presented a significant challenge for the investigators, who had already circulated an inaccurate composite sketch of the suspect through the media, and to patrol officers, leading the search for an entirely different individual. This unfolding drama took place within the critical first 48 hours following the abduction, the most crucial period for a swift resolution. Based on her description, they promptly created a new composite sketch and redistributed it. Additionally, the police decided to interview all men in the area with prior convictions for sexual offenses. Numerous volunteers also joined the efforts, going door to door to interview residents in the hopes of someone recognizing the abductor or providing any other relevant information. They posted thousands of flyers featuring her photo and a description of the incident, and in just the initial few days, a staggering 42,000 of these flyers were distributed. After several days, they received their first promising lead. 3 individuals contacted them, reporting a hiking trip in a vast national park near their city. During their excursion, the hikers stumbled upon footprints on the ground, distinguishing one set belonging to an adult and another to a child. They decided to follow these tracks, eventually coming across a blanket and empty fast food wrappers deep in the forest. The police considered the possibility that these tracks might be connected to Maya and her abductor. The FBI's psychological profile also suggested that the abductor would likely take his victim to a secluded location, far removed from civilization. Given the park's size and its proximity to the city, it seemed to align perfectly with this theory. Detectives decided to conduct a thorough search of the park, utilizing all available resources. They scoured the ground, while helicopters equipped with thermal imaging scanned the area from above. However, all their efforts yielded nothing, as they couldn't find her or any incriminating evidence. The police extended their search to other parks, mountains, and remote areas, but all leads proved futile. Meanwhile, the case's nationwide media coverage sparked a deluge of tips, with over 4,000 received within the first month alone. Investigators faced the daunting task of pursuing each lead, a challenge that proved overwhelming. The case was a hot topic of discussion among San Francisco's neighboring residents and nearby cities, with prominent figures even making public appeals for information. As the search continued, a substantial $70,000 reward was offered, and Michaela's photograph was plastered on millions of milk cartons across the state. Despite the massive community effort and numerous leads, detectives made little headway. By December's end, a month and a half into the investigation, the police had only managed to exhaust thousands of leads, with no progress made in the following months. Still, the police, along with Michaela's mother, who had launched her own investigation, studying similar cases and searching for possible suspects, persisted in their efforts, holding on to the hope that Michaela was still alive, being held captive by her abductor. In 1991, detectives focused on 43-year-old Timothy Binder, and the deeper they dug into his background, the more disturbing it became. Before Michaela's abduction, Binder was already under police suspicion due to his odd behavior. He had been sending gifts, letters, and money to several young girls, with some of these letters featuring highlighted Bible passages that included phrases like, "I have chosen you," and "be with me." Parents of some of these girls grew concerned and reported him to the police, which led to an interrogation of Binder. He claimed he was simply trying to befriend these girls, thinking they were lonely. However, the investigation uncovered a worrying history. In 1985, Binder was fired from his job in Child Protective Services in Colorado for collecting personal information about young girls and then sending them gifts and letters. A search of his van revealed many photographs of children and Bible passages decorating the interior. Additionally, Binder had previously been arrested for trying to lure 2 girls into his van, although no charges were filed. Furthermore, he regularly visited local cemeteries, spending an unusual amount of time at the graves of young girls. 6 months before Michaela was abducted, a 7-year-old girl named Amber vanished in the same area. Binder got in touch with Amber's mother, offering to help and frequently visiting her home. He even sent a letter to the police, predicting that the next girl to go missing would be 9 years old. Months later, Michaela, who was also 9, was abducted. After she disappeared, Binder contacted her mother repeatedly, visited her home, and offered his assistance. But the disturbing pattern continued. In early December 1988, Binder sent a Christmas card to an FBI profiler he had spoken to before, and the card showed a girl holding up 4 fingers. Shortly after, a 4-year-old girl went missing in the same town. Despite these disturbing circumstances, which comprised circumstantial evidence, detectives secured a search warrant for Binder's home, where he resided with his wife. Unfortunately, their search yielded no concrete leads linking him to the abductions. When news of Binder's peculiar behavior hit the newspapers, the public began to suspect he might be a serial killer, resulting in harassment and attacks on him and his family. He subsequently sued the city authorities for disseminating misinformation and emerged victorious. Detectives persisted in investigating Binder for several months, but ultimately concluded that there was no concrete evidence implicating him in these crimes. Some detectives believed that he posed no threat to children, and his unusual behavior might have been unrelated to these cases. Consequently, the police shifted their focus towards alternative suspects. A new substantial lead did not emerge until December 1992, 4 years after Michaela's disappearance. An inmate from Indiana, serving time for robbery, contacted the police, claiming to know the identity of her abductor. He stated that he had helped bury her body in the same park where traces of evidence had been discovered. Initially, investigators showed little interest in this tip, but when the inmate wrote a letter to a prominent San Francisco newspaper, the police faced harsh criticism, and under public pressure, they reluctantly decided to interview him. He promised not only to pinpoint Michaela's exact burial site, but also to lead them directly to the killer. The inmate was transferred to California, where he collaborated with the police on a search mission. He claimed that the body was buried in a gladiolus field, and the officers devoted all their resources to scouring that area. The search lasted 8 hours, until the inmate unexpectedly confessed that he had fabricated the entire story. He explained that his intention was to bring some comfort to Michaela's family and help them find closure. However, Michaela's relatives and the police were outraged by his false statement. As a consequence, the inmate received an additional 6.5-year prison sentence, nearly doubling his original sentence, and was ordered to pay Michaela's family $6,000 in compensation. In August 2000, a new lead emerged in the case with the arrest of Curtis Anderson, suspected of murdering a 7-year-old girl in Valo a year earlier. He confessed to the crime and was imprisoned. However, detectives harbored suspicions that he might be responsible for similar crimes. For 7 years, no concrete evidence supported this theory until Curtis reached out to the FBI. Weakened by poor health, he wanted to confess to additional crimes before his demise. His confession revealed that he had killed 13 more girls and women, including 7-year-old Amber, who vanished 6 months before Michaela. Curtis provided specific details that made investigators take his involvement seriously. Nonetheless, proving his guilt remained a daunting task, as there was no physical evidence and the victims' bodies remained unfound. Regarding Michaela's case, Curtis denied any involvement, despite his car's striking resemblance to Katrina's description. Although FBI agents planned to continue questioning him, Curtis passed away in 2012, halting the investigation. A new lead emerged when an inmate contacted the police, suggesting that his associate Lauren Herzog bore a remarkable likeness to the composite sketch of the suspect. Detectives were intrigued, given Lauren and his partner's conviction for multiple murders they committed together. Although suspected of killing 19 people, investigators could only prove some of these crimes. Notably, Lauren had taken his own life in prison a month before the inmate came forward. Undeterred, the police investigated Lauren's potential involvement. A younger photo of Lauren did resemble the composite sketch, but detectives required more concrete evidence. They proceeded to excavate a well where Lauren and his partner had disposed of their victims' bodies. The excavation yielded thousands of bone fragments, which medical experts meticulously examined. After extensive analysis, it was determined that the bones belonged to 5 different girls, but none matched Michaela's DNA. Despite excavating multiple wells, the police were unable to find any evidence linking Lauren to the case. In 2018, a significant breakthrough emerged in the case. David Mitch, a man already imprisoned for killing his 39-year-old girlfriend in 1989, was charged with the murders of 2 women in 1986 near Michaela's town. The key to this development was modern DNA analysis, which enabled investigators to link David to these crimes by analyzing biological material found under the victim's nails, something that was impossible back then. Detectives decided to investigate his possible involvement in Michaela's case and found several intriguing connections. They discovered that David was in the same area when Michaela was abducted, matching Katrina's description and driving a similar car. Since David's fingerprints were already on record, experts re-examined the partial fingerprint found on Michaela's scooter. Thanks to modern technology, they made a significant breakthrough. The fingerprint on the scooter perfectly matched David's. By 2020, the hope of Michaela being alive had faded, and David was charged with her murder. He denied his involvement, and the case went to trial in early 2023. Preliminary hearings took place, and the judge ruled that there was sufficient evidence to proceed with the trial. David's lawyer attempted to challenge the evidence, claiming that the scooter's fingerprint didn't necessarily link his client to the crime. However, given the circumstances, this argument seemed dubious, as it was apparent that the abductor had deliberately left the scooter near the car's back door to ambush her when she approached. The defense also tried to contest the murder charges, as Michaela's body was never found, implying a lack of proof of her death. However, this argument held little weight, as numerous modern cases have resulted in convictions without the recovery of the victim's body, given the substantial evidence. Furthermore, David had a history of violent crimes throughout his life. Michaela's father traveled from out of state to attend the press conference announcing the arrest of his daughter's kidnapper. Unfortunately, Michaela's mother, who had held on to hope of finding her daughter alive all these years, was unable to attend as she battled cancer. Shortly after the news of the arrest, she passed away, thanking the investigators for uncovering the truth before her life's end. The police pledged to continue searching for Michaela's remains, offering a $10,000 reward for any valuable information that could lead to her discovery. David's trial is about to start and will cover 3 separate cases: the murder of Michaela and 2 other cases where his DNA was found under the victim's fingernails. Initially, the prosecution pushed for the death penalty, but when the district attorney changed, the new one decided not to pursue it. If David is found guilty of all 3 murders, he will not receive a life sentence, but rather a prison sentence of several decades. This decision has outraged the victims, families, and garnered significant media attention, with David's lawyer being the only one to support this change. However, considering David is already 62 years old, it's unlikely he will live to see the end of even this reduced sentence. The case of April Tinsley. April Tinsley was born on March 18, 1980, in Fort Wayne, Indiana, as the eldest child in her family. She attended elementary school and was involved in the local church's children's choir, but her true passion was socializing with friends, exploring the neighborhood, and simply enjoying herself. On Friday, April 1st, 1988, 8-year-old April returned home from school early, eager to start her afternoon adventures. After lunch, she asked her mom if she could visit her friend Nicole, who lived just a few hundred yards away. Her mom consented, as she had many times before. Nicole's house was a short, familiar walk away, and their neighborhood was considered a safe haven. As April set off, her mom reminded her to call as soon as she arrived at the Coles house and handed her an umbrella, anticipating the impending rain. A few minutes later, April called her mom from Nicole's house, and her mom instructed her to be back home by 4 p.m. However, when the appointed time came and went, April still hadn't returned. Her mom began to worry that she might get caught in the rain and called Nicole's house. Nicole's mom answered, saying that April and her daughter had gone to play at a nearby playground. While they were there, it started to rain, and April realized she had left her umbrella at Nicole's house. April told Nicole she would walk to her house, retrieve the umbrella, and then head home, as she had promised her mom. Nicole, on the other hand, decided to visit another friend's house, and the girls went their separate ways. However, when Nicole's mom informed April's mom that April never stopped by to get the umbrella, despite leaving the playground almost an hour ago, April's mom immediately grew concerned. She alerted her husband that their daughter was missing, and they set out to search for her. Several neighbors joined in upon hearing about April's disappearance, and together they combed all the streets connecting Nicole's house, the playground, and their home. But they found no sign of her. The parents then decided to contact the police. Officers arrived at the Tinley's home, obtaining a photo and description of April, and promptly launched a search effort. Within hours, dozens of neighbors joined the search party, eager to help the family locate their daughter. The search area spanned several miles around April's usual route, but despite their efforts, no signs of her were found. As night descended, the police began to suspect that they were likely dealing with a kidnapping, reasoning that if April had simply gotten lost, she would have been located by now. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. The next day, the search area was broadened, and news of April's disappearance swept through the city. Despite an influx of police and volunteers joining the effort, they still couldn't find her or any leads. This continued for 3 days until April 4th, when a jogger phoned 911, reporting a disturbing discovery. While running along a road about 20 meters from April's home, he had noticed something peculiar in a ditch. As he drew closer, he realized it was a human body. The police rushed to the scene and confirmed the worst. It was April Tinsley. She was fully clothed, except for one shoe. Officers couldn't find any obvious signs of trauma on her body, but they were almost certain she had been murdered. They theorized that an unknown perpetrator had killed her elsewhere, then brought her to this field and left her body in a ditch. Police also discovered an adult toy nearby, although they weren't sure if it was linked to the case. Later, they found April's second shoe lying on the other side of the road, a few hundred yards from her body. Medical experts determined that April's death was caused by asphyxiation, and she had also been sexually assaulted. They established that her death had occurred within the 48 hours preceding the discovery of her body, indicating that the perpetrator had held her captive for some time. Although forensic science and DNA analysis were still in their infancy, experts managed to collect evidence from the body. However, the lack of a DNA database at the time meant detectives had to rely on new leads. Fortunately, they didn't have to wait long after the body was found. Investigators appealed to the public through the media, and numerous tips were received. 2 tips, in particular, caught their attention. One individual contacted the police, reporting that he had driven past the field where April's body was found and noticed an old blue pickup truck parked on the side of the road. Investigators believed it could belong to the killer, and the witness might have seen it when the perpetrator dumped April's body in the ditch, making this lead even more valuable. A woman living along the route from the playground to Nicole's house reported seeing a girl resembling April on the day of her disappearance. According to the witness, as the girl walked along the road, an old blue pickup truck pulled up beside her, and, a few seconds later, it drove away with the girl on board. Although the car obstructed her view, the witness couldn't see exactly how the girl got inside. This tip became the first significant lead for investigators, who were also provided with a description of the driver, a white man around 30 years old with blonde or ginger hair. Based on this information, police created a sketch of the suspect and distributed it to the media, along with a description of his vehicle, hoping someone would recognize him. The FBI soon joined the investigation, and together with the police, they looked into the possible involvement of all men who had previously been convicted of sexual crimes living in April's area, seeking new leads. At some point, they were informed that the suspect's portrait resembled a man who had been involved in organized crime activities and had an interest in Satanism. Investigators checked on this individual, but couldn't establish his involvement. However, they arrested him for another offense unrelated to April's disappearance. Police continued to pursue leads and investigate numerous individuals, but they failed to make any significant breakthroughs. This stagnant state persisted for several months, and eventually, detectives hit a dead end. Notably, during the course of the investigation, police uncovered several other crimes against children and apprehended the perpetrators, but the individual responsible for April's murder remained at large. In the following years, the case saw no major advancements, but in May 1990, a sudden and unexpected twist emerged. A teenage boy living 10 miles from where April's body was discovered found a message on his shed, written from the perspective of the perpetrator. The killer confessed to April's murder, hinting at further crimes to come, and inquired about the status of the victim's second shoe. This prompted detectives to suspect that the author was likely April's killer rather than a prankster. The discovery was significant because the detail about the victim's shoe being found several hundred yards from her body had never been released to the media, making it unlikely that anyone but the killer would know this. Another fascinating aspect of the message was that it had initially been written in pencil and then traced over in marker. This led investigators to theorize that the perpetrator may have left the message months prior to its discovery and then returned to make it more conspicuous by outlining it in marker. Police decided to release photos of the cryptic message, hoping someone would recognize the handwriting, but unfortunately, it didn't yield any breakthroughs. Just a few months later, the residents of Wayne were left reeling by the shocking news that police had discovered the body of a 7-year-old girl in another part of the city. She had been sexually assaulted, and the cause of death was asphyxiation. Given the eerie parallels to April's case, police instinctively suspected that the same perpetrator was behind this heinous crime. However, FBI profilers disagreed, convinced that they were dealing with two separate offenders. Despite their efforts, no progress was made in either case until 1995, when police finally linked the second victim's murder to a family friend who had since passed away. As a result, the case was closed, and investigators ceased to consider it related to April's murder. Detectives waited for the perpetrator to make contact again, as his initial message suggested he reveled in mocking the police and flaunting his apparent impunity. However, as the years went by, no new messages surfaced. The case remained stagnant until 2004, when it took a dramatic turn. A Fort Wayne girl discovered a plastic zip bag in her bike basket, containing a chilling note that left her shaken. She promptly showed it to her parents, who alerted the authorities. The note read, "Hello dear, I've been watching you. I'm the one who kidnapped, assaulted, and killed April Tensley. I have a gift for you. You'll be my next victim if you don't report this to the police, and I don't see this note in tomorrow's local news. I'll destroy your home, killing everyone but you. You'll be mine." The police had no doubt that the note's author was indeed April's killer. Inside the bag with the note was a used condom sent to the laboratory for analysis. By 2004, DNA profiling had become a routine tool, and experts had already extracted a profile from the semen found on April's body. Now the analysis revealed that the biological sample from the condom matched the same individual, but he was not in the FBI database. The police reopened April's case and soon received a report of a second note. Another girl had found a plastic bag containing a similar message, including a used condom with the same man's DNA. The perpetrator had written that he had killed April Tinsley and threatened to kill this girl as well. In the following months, the police received 2 more calls about similar notes found by other girls. This time, the perpetrator had attached Polaroid photos of his genitalia, which investigators examined for clues. Although all they noticed was a green pattern on the bedsheet in the background, they tried to locate stores selling similar bedding, but it didn't lead to a breakthrough. Within just a few months, the perpetrator had left a total of 4 notes, but then fell silent for years. Once again, in 2009, the FBI released a detailed profile of the killer, including witness-identified physical characteristics, but unfortunately, it yielded no leads. For Fort Wayne investigators, this case remained a top priority for several compelling reasons. Firstly, and most importantly, they were driven to achieve justice and bring the perpetrator who took April's life to account. The killer's audacity was further demonstrated by his taunting messages to the police, which suggested he believed he would never be caught, and his threats against other girls. In a brazen move, he left behind his DNA for detectives to find, providing them with numerous biological samples. However, despite the wealth of evidence, April's killer remained absent from the FBI's database over the years, indicating he had avoided serious criminal convictions and continued to live freely. In 2012, a popular television program about unsolved crimes featured April's case, generating a fresh wave of tips, but each one ultimately led to a dead end. In 2015, detectives reopened the investigation and turned to Parabon, a company that provided law enforcement agencies with a novel service, creating portraits of individuals based on their DNA samples. This innovative approach had already successfully solved several cases. Investigators shared the portrait of the suspect in April's case online and with the media, hoping someone would recognize the person. However, luck was not on their side, and they didn't receive any valuable leads, but the police remained determined. Years later, in 2018, they contacted Parabon again, this time to explore genetic genealogy, a pioneering approach. This method involves experts taking a DNA sample and scouring publicly available genetic databases for any relatives of the DNA owner, no matter how distant. They typically find thousands of people, then study their family trees to identify someone who matches the perpetrator's criteria, such as gender, age, location at the time of the crime, and more. The unique aspect of this method is that the DNA owner doesn't need to be in a database. They can be identified solely through a long chain of relatives. Detectives working on April's case sent the killer's DNA sample to Parabon once again, waiting patiently for the results. The process of tracing relatives and studying their family trees was a lengthy one, requiring experts to sift through vast amounts of data over several months. Eventually, they informed the detectives that they had traced the DNA lineage to 2 brothers living in Fort Wayne. Now, the police had to determine which of the brothers was the killer. They placed both men under surveillance, collecting their trash in the hopes of extracting DNA samples. It wasn't long before the experts called the detectives with the long-awaited news. 30 years after the murder, they had found a perfect match. The DNA taken from the victim's body and the condoms matched the DNA of one of the brothers, 59-year-old John Miller, who lived in the small town of Grail, not far from where April's body was found. At the time of the murder, he was 29 years old and resided in the same trailer. The police decided to obtain a direct DNA sample from Miller and interrogate him. When they arrived at his trailer and asked him to accompany them to the station, he astutely guessed they were there about April Tinsley. On the way to the station, Miller engaged in small talk, appearing remarkably relaxed. At the interrogation, Miller neither denied nor contested the allegations and confessed to abducting, sexually assaulting, and murdering April. He claimed to have deliberately targeted Fort Wayne, spotting April on a deserted street and telling her to get into his car, to which she silently acquiesced. He then took her to his trailer, where he assaulted and killed her before dumping her body. Miller's lawyer advised him to plead not guilty to protract the legal process. However, he was offered a deal. In exchange for admitting guilt, the death penalty would be commuted to an 80-year prison sentence. Miller accepted the deal, admitted his guilt, and received the 80-year sentence. April's mother was disappointed that Miller escaped the death penalty, but given his advanced age, it is unlikely he will ever be released. April's father, on the other hand, thanked the investigators for their tireless efforts in finding his daughter's killer. The detectives believe Miller had a motive for wanting to be caught. He deliberately courted attention, taking risks such as leaving DNA samples at the crime scene. They suspect he was either prepared to be found out or actively sought it. The case of Tara Lynn Grant. Hi everyone. Today we're diving into the baffling case of a mother who disappeared from her home under mysterious circumstances. The police launched an exhaustive investigation, unearthing surprising and even bizarre clues. As they pieced together the truth, even seasoned detectives were left stunned. This case quickly became one of the most sensational in the country, with its shocking details leaving everyone outraged. Tara Grant was born on June 22, 1972, in Michigan. She grew up on a farm with her parents and sister, developing a deep love for the outdoors, horseback riding, and helping with the farm animals. In school, Tara was a sports enthusiast, participating in cheerleading, basketball, and the school band. After graduating, she attended the University of Michigan, where she met her future husband, Stephen. The couple started dating and soon tied the knot after her graduation. Tara, armed with a business degree, landed a job at a large international company. Stephen, who had ambitions in politics, initially worked as an assistant to a state senator during his university days. However, when the senator retired, Stephen found himself without a job and began working at his father's small tool-making shop. 4 years after their wedding, the couple welcomed a daughter, followed by a son a few years later. They then purchased a new home in a prestigious Macomb County, Michigan neighborhood just outside of Detroit. By this time, Tara had made substantial career progress, but it came at a cost. Her job required frequent travel, often to different states and countries, limiting her to weekend visits with her family. As a result, Stephen assumed most of the childcare responsibilities. His flexible schedule at his father's company allowed him to spend more time with the kids, but juggling work and childcare remained a challenge. To alleviate this, they decided to hire a full-time nanny. Through a special program, they found a young woman from Germany who would live with them and care for their children. Thanks to Tara's job, they could afford this arrangement, and the new nanny quickly bonded with their children, taking on most childcare duties. With his newfound free time, Stephen also started working part-time as a youth soccer coach. But despite their comfortable financial situation, Tara's constant absence put a strain on her relationship with Stephen. With her only being home on weekends, their arguments became more frequent. Tara held on to the hope that her next promotion would allow her to adjust her schedule and spend more quality time at home, but until then, she was constantly away on business trips. This uneasy routine continued until February 14, 2007, when an unexpected turn of events unfolded. On Valentine's Day, Stephen grew concerned and called the police, reporting that Tara had been out of touch for 5 days, a rarity. He recounted the events of February 9th, when Tara returned from a business trip, only to announce she had to leave a day early, leaving them with just 1 day together. The tension between them escalated into another argument, and Tara began packing her suitcase. Stephen overheard her making a hushed phone call, saying, "I'll be waiting at the end of the street," before she swiftly departed, getting into a dark-colored car. Since then, Tara had been unreachable, ignoring all of Stephen's calls. The police's first question was why Stephen had waited 5 days to report Tara's disappearance. But Stephen claimed he hadn't been initially concerned, thinking she'd simply left early for her business trip and was ignoring his calls due to their recent argument. However, as the days passed, He began to worry when she failed to contact the kids, aged 3 and 7, as she normally did when away. Then, on Monday, Tara's boss called to say she'd missed a meeting, which was highly unusual and suggested she hadn't gone to work at all. Stephen informed Tara's relatives about her disappearance, but they were skeptical, assuming she'd taken a break from him and their constant arguing. After all, Tara had confided in her parents about the strain her job was putting on their relationship and the frequent rows that had become a regular feature of their lives. Her relatives thought she'd soon return home, needing time and space from Stephen. As time passed, Tara's absence continued and her silence persisted. Eventually, Stephen's concern turned to worry, and he contacted the police. During the police interrogation, the officers noticed several suspicious scratches on Stephen's body. When questioned about a possible physical altercation with his wife, Stephen attributed the marks to his frequent work with metal parts at his father's shop, citing regular scratches as an occupational hazard. Following the station interview, the detectives requested a search of the couple's home, which Stephen granted. Upon arrival, they found that all of Tara's belongings, including her personal documents and purse, were missing, along with her luggage. Stephen also provided access to Tara's computer, allowing the detectives to review her bank account activity. The lack of transactions since her disappearance seemed unusual, as one would expect some financial activity if she had indeed traveled, such as booking a flight or hotel. During the search of the house, detectives failed to uncover any clues that could explain Tara's disappearance. With no signs of a crime, they were left to retracing her steps since February 9th. The local police department, accustomed to handling minor disputes and nonviolent incidents in the area, was inexperienced in investigating such cases, given the region's reputation as one of the safest in the country. Stephen was outraged when asked to take a polygraph test, feeling accused by the police. He tearfully insisted he would never harm his wife. The police departed, considering their next moves, but Stephen surprisingly called them the following morning, ready to cooperate. However, just moments later, his lawyer intervened, advising against the interrogation. The police had no choice but to focus on Stephen as the prime suspect, being Tara's husband. Standard procedure aside, they had no other leads to pursue. Tara's relatives, friends, and colleagues all claimed to have had no contact with her since February 9th and were clueless about her whereabouts. Moreover, her bank account remained inactive, despite her likely need for financial transactions. Detectives shifted their focus to Stephen, and it didn't take long to uncover an important detail. His driver's license had been revoked, yet he continued to drive. They waited for him to get behind the wheel and then arrested him. However, Stephen still felt like he was being treated as a suspect and refused to cooperate with the police. His lawyer quickly secured his release, and Stephen returned home. The police persisted in their search for clues, obtaining Tara's mobile phone records in the process. They found that her last call was made on the day she vanished, when she called Stephen from the airport, saying she'd be home soon. After that, Stephen made numerous calls to her, but they all went to voicemail. The detectives listened to these recordings, in which Stephen repeatedly asked her to answer or call back, accusing her of neglecting their children. He also pleaded with her to come home for their sake. The phone itself was turned off, and according to the cell phone carrier's data, it last connected to cell towers near Tara's house on the evening of her disappearance. Notably, there were no incoming calls during that period. As we recall, Stephen revealed that Tara had received a call before leaving the house, with the caller stating she would wait for her on the street. However, upon reviewing Stephen's voicemail recordings, detectives sensed genuine concern for his wife's well-being, accompanied by anger towards her decision to leave their children behind. Despite this, they didn't clear him as a suspect just yet. The investigation stalled, yielding no new leads, as Stephen persisted in refusing police cooperation, accusing them of misallocating resources on him rather than focusing on finding Tara. Conversely, he actively courted the media, which began extensive coverage of the case from its early stages. Tara's enigmatic disappearance sparked widespread public interest, and Stephen became a constant presence in front of cameras, daily pleading for her safe return. As the case unfolded, the company that had facilitated the hiring of the nanny for Stephen and Tara took action, ultimately deciding to send her back to Germany. Prior to her departure, she provided a statement to the authorities, speaking highly of her experience in their household. She also revealed that on the evening Tara returned home, she had been out at a bar with friends. Upon her return, she encountered Stephen, who appeared distraught, informing her that Tara had just exited the house. Despite refusing to cooperate with the police, Stephen hired a former FBI agent as a private detective to investigate Tara's disappearance. However, this effort also yielded no results. With no leads, the police decided to take a different approach. They contacted the agency that helped Tara and Stephen find their nanny, and there they made an interesting discovery. Before hiring the nanny from Germany, the couple had employed 6 other nannies, none of whom stayed in the job for long. When detectives spoke to these former nannies, almost all described Stephen's behavior as not only strange, but also intimidating. According to their accounts, Stephen would rummage through their belongings, ask them inappropriate questions, and frequently yell at them, treating them like they were his subordinates. The police were puzzled by the stark contrast between these descriptions and the German nanny's glowing account of her time with the family. They obtained permission to monitor her emails and phone calls, which led to a surprising revelation. Detectives uncovered messages between the nanny and Stephen, revealing that they had been having an affair. It turned out that the 19-year-old nanny had been in a romantic relationship with Stephen during Tara's business trips, and this continued until she was forced to leave the country. Although the police considered Stephen's infidelity a significant lead, it did not directly link him to Tara's disappearance. Thus, they continued searching for additional evidence. During interviews with Tara's relatives and friends, detectives discovered that almost everyone had disliked Stephen since she married him. They described him as behaving strangely, trying to control her every move, and having poor relationships with her family members. The investigation further revealed that Stephen's former girlfriend, whom he dated before meeting Tara, contacted the police with some information. She disclosed that Stephen had reached out to her several months prior, and their conversations gradually became more intimate over time. Stephen eventually expressed his desire to start a romantic relationship with her, despite both being married. He also complained about Tara's frequent absences and suspected her of cheating on him with her boss. Furthermore, he admitted to installing special software on her computer, which allowed him to read her messages, but found no evidence to support his suspicions. All of this led the police to strongly suspect the husband's involvement in Tara's disappearance, but they still required concrete evidence. Weeks into the investigation, they started considering the grim possibility that Tara might no longer be alive, and thus launched a massive search operation to find her body. They recruited volunteers and combed the area within a several-mile radius of Tara's home, as well as a nearby large park. The search continued for days, but yielded nothing. This stalemate persisted until February 28th, when a local resident contacted the police. Aware of Tara's disappearance and the ongoing search, the woman had been vigilant during her walk in the same park. She soon spotted something unusual under one of the trees along the trail. A plastic bag camouflaged with branches and snow, obviously containing something. Curious, the woman took a closer look and saw rubber gloves and metal shavings-like objects inside the bag, as well as a dark red substance at the bottom. She decided to take the bag with her and handed it over to the police. Detectives immediately realized that there was likely blood at the bottom of the bag and sent it to the lab. However, there was a problem. Experts warned that due to a high workload, DNA analysis could take up to 2 months. Nevertheless, they examined the contents and confirmed that it did indeed seem to be human blood. The police immediately focused their search efforts in the area where the bag was found, deploying all available resources. Stephen did not participate in the search, citing bias from the police. Instead, he gave a lengthy interview to a news channel, making quite a few questionable statements. He repeatedly criticized Tara for being absent from her home most of the time, labeling her a bad mother. Stephen claimed he took on almost all parenting responsibilities and was a better mother than she was. When reporters asked about their financial situation and whether he had been living mostly on Tara's money, Stephen became angry and insisted he didn't need a penny from her. During the interview, Stephen made accusations of infidelity against Tara, but he failed to provide any evidence to support his claims. Throughout the conversation, he consistently denigrated Tara, emphasizing the difficulties he had faced in their marriage. Meanwhile, the detectives made significant progress in their investigation. Previously, they had been unable to obtain a search warrant for Tara's home due to lack of sufficient grounds, and Stephen had refused to grant them voluntary access. However, after the discovery of the blood-stained bag in the park, the judge finally granted the warrant. As the police arrived at the house, Stephen returned from the interview. Upon being informed of the search warrant, he unlocked the door for the detectives before contacting his lawyer. The lawyer asked the police if his client, Stephen, was under arrest, and they replied that he was not. Stephen then announced that he would take his dog for a walk, retrieved it from the house, and left the premises while the police conducted a search. As the police searched the house room by room, they eventually reached the garage, where one of the detectives spotted a large green container holding several plastic bags. Upon opening one of the bags, they discovered an unknown substance along with what appeared to be women's clothing. Opening another bag, the officer was horrified to find what likely were human remains. In total, the container held 5 bags, and the detectives quickly confirmed that they contained the remains of a woman. The police realized that they had found Tara's body and that Stephen was likely her killer. However, Stephen had not returned, so the police immediately launched a search for him, fearing he might flee or harm someone else, knowing that he would likely face prison time. Meanwhile, officers called in reinforcements to search the nearby park, as only a portion of Tara's remains were found in the garage. Over 100 officers from neighboring districts were dispatched to assist in the search. Their efforts quickly paid off, as they found another part of the body several hundred yards from where the bag was discovered, and later they found the head. Due to the cold temperatures, the remains were well preserved, allowing detectives to confirm that they belonged to Tara. As the search continued, the police found several more body parts, and when night fell, the search was suspended until morning. All this time, detectives were also trying to track down Stephen, but they were unsuccessful. They contacted his friends, and one of them came forward, saying Stephen had phoned him to let him know the police were searching his house and asking for a ride from the street. The friend drove to the location and picked Stephen up, taking him to his own home. During the drive, the friend noticed Stephen's strange behavior. He was terrified, his hands were trembling, and it seemed like he was on the edge of a nervous collapse. Once they arrived at the friend's house, Stephen asked to see his kids and requested to borrow the friend's car. At the time, Stephen's children were living in another state with his sister. The friend handed over his pickup truck, and Stephen took off. The police asked for information about Stephen's phone and credit cards, which enabled them to rapidly trace his journey. They found that Stephen had made several cash withdrawals on his way to the neighboring state and had phoned his sister, leading the police to conclude that he was heading towards his children. They immediately set off in that direction. Just then, an unexpected call came in from Germany. It was from the nanny with whom Stephen had previously been in a romantic relationship. She informed the police that Stephen had just called her, confessing to killing Tara. According to Stephen, the couple had an argument that evening, during which he yelled at her. Tara slapped him in the face, and in a fit of rage, he pushed her, causing her to fall and hit her head on the floor, resulting in her death. The police had no doubt about Stephen's involvement, but they still had to track him down. They searched the area along the highway to the neighboring state for several hours and eventually found the car belonging to Stephen's friend abandoned near the entrance to the national park. However, Stephen himself was nowhere to be found. The police then focused their search on the park, and several hours later, with the help of thermal cameras, they finally located him. He was lying under a tree, wearing only light clothing, and the officers realized he was on the verge of dying from hypothermia. In an altered state, Stephen was talking to trees and muttering incoherent phrases. The police quickly airlifted him to the hospital. Doctors managed to save his life. However, it took some time for Stephen to fully recover. While in the hospital, Stephen was charged with murder, and the detectives handed the case over to the court on the same day. Notably, his lawyer withdrew from defending him, citing that he needed to be able to look at himself in the mirror in the mornings when asked why. A new lawyer was assigned to Stephen, and meanwhile, forensic experts examined Tara's remains. A renowned pathologist who had worked on high-profile cases, such as the J.F. Kennedy and John Bennett Ramsey cases, was appointed as the chief medical examiner. After examining the remains, the pathologist concluded that Stephen's initial account of events did not align with reality. Stephen had claimed that Tara died from a head injury, but the actual cause of death was revealed to be strangulation. When Stephen regained consciousness, detectives visited him in the hospital, and he told them what truly happened that evening. He confessed that when Tara came home and announced she had to leave earlier, they got into an argument, and he started yelling at her. As she tried to leave the room, he grabbed her and Tara hit him in the face. Enraged, Stephen retaliated and then strangled her. Stephen dragged Tara's body from the second floor to the garage and put her in the trunk of her own car. At the same time, the nanny returned home, and Stephen lied to her, saying his wife had just left him. The next morning, he took the body to his father's workshop, making sure he was alone. There, he destroyed all of Tara's documents and personal belongings, and then dismembered her body using a saw. This gruesome task made him vomit twice, but he kept telling himself that if he didn't do it, he would spend the rest of his life in prison. After several hours, he packed the remains into plastic bags and put them in a container. He then returned home, leaving the body in the car for a few days. During this time, he was thinking of ways to get rid of the body without arousing suspicion. To create an alibi, he repeatedly called Tara's phone and left messages on her voicemail, pleading with her to come home. One day, Stephen took his children's snow sled to the park, where the bags containing human remains would later be discovered. He placed a container on the sled and pulled it up a hill away from the crowded areas. However, the rope slipped out of his hands and the sled rolled down the hill, causing the container to overturn and the bags to spill out. Stephen picked up the bags, put the container back on the sled, and eventually buried them under the snow in a remote area before returning home. Days later, when the police started searching for Tara, detectives announced they were launching a search operation in the park. Stephen became anxious, as he knew one of the bags, the largest one, was not hidden well and feared it would be found quickly. He went to the park, retrieved a few bags, and carried them to his father's workshop, leaving them on the roof. The day before his interview, Stephen took a container from his home to the workshop, retrieved some bags from it, and brought them back to his garage. The next day, the police obtained a search warrant for his house and found the bags in the container, which led to Stephen's confession. It turned out that Stephen had planned to take his own life rather than surrender, but he couldn't follow through with it, even after nearly freezing to death. During his conversation with the police, Stephen showed no remorse for his actions and would often smile and joke, even when discussing how he got rid of the body. While awaiting trial in prison, Stephen's children stayed with his sister. However, Tara's family was unhappy with this arrangement, and eventually they managed to have the children moved to Tara's sister's care. Although Stephen's family still had visitation rights, Tara's relatives were relieved to have the children out of his sister's hands, especially given her continued sympathy for Stephen and her insensitive jokes about Tara's murder. The trial started in November 2007, and Stephen admitted his guilt from the outset. Despite this, his new lawyer attempted to secure a lighter sentence by highlighting the marital issues that had been plaguing Stephen and his wife for years, largely due to her frequent absences. However, evidence presented during the trial contradicted Stephen's claim that Tara had been planning to leave a day earlier. Her boss testified that she had no additional meetings scheduled and was expected to start work at her usual time. This was corroborated by Tara's sister, who had spoken with her shortly before the murder and was told that she would be home all weekend as usual. Furthermore, there was no credible evidence to suggest that Tara was having an affair. Her boss confirmed that their relationship was purely professional, and this was supported by their email exchanges and text messages. Even Stephen himself acknowledged that he had no basis for believing this. Ultimately, the prosecution was unable to prove that Stephen had planned the murder in advance. It appeared that he had committed the crime in a fit of rage, which could have led to a charge of second-degree murder rather than first-degree murder. On December 21, 2007, a jury delivered a unanimous guilty verdict against Stephen, and he received a minimum 50-year prison sentence. Despite his lawyer's efforts to appeal the verdict, it was unsuccessful. Stephen has since been serving his sentence in prison, but there is more to his story. The murder of Tara garnered widespread national attention, and Stephen seemed to revel in the notoriety. While incarcerated, he began writing a book and sought his sister's assistance to have it published. They even explored the possibility of adapting it into a film, with Stephen considering which renowned actor could portray him. In 2008, new information emerged. Stephen's children confided in their aunt, revealing that they had actually seen their father kill their mother on that fateful evening. They had come out of their room after hearing screams and witnessed the entire traumatic event. When this news broke in the media, Stephen's relatives accused the children of lying and continued to defend him. In the same year, it was also discovered that Stephen's father, who had not supported his son, was overcome with grief and guilt, and his body was found in his own home. To this day, Stephen remains in prison, and he will not be eligible for parole until 2058. Every year, Tara's relatives and friends organize a marathon along the route in the park where she used to jog regularly, and her children always participate. Despite their father's heinous actions, they have found the strength to move forward and honor their mother's memory.